Why does life feel heavier the older we get? It's not just the body, though the knees ache, the back tightens, and sleep grows thin. No, it's something deeper. It's the weight of memory, of all we've lived, all we've lost, and all we still carry in silence. Regret that lingers, names we whisper only in dreams, roles that once defined us, slowly fading into the rearview. We were never taught how to lay that weight down, only how to endure it. But what if aging was never meant to be a burden? What if it was a doorway into peace, into wisdom, into a lighter way of being? In this episode, we'll explore why growing older feels so heavy, and how Buddhist teachings can help us float again, not by going back in time, but by surrendering to this one. So if you've ever felt the weight of your years pressing on your spirit, you're not alone. And if you're ready to walk a little lighter, a little softer, a little more peacefully, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings and join a community where healing is quiet, wisdom is shared, and every breath is honored. Take a breath, and let's begin. Part 1. The weight no one talks about. There's a kind of weight we carry as we age that has nothing to do with pounds or bones. It's not the creak in the knees when we rise from the couch, not the heaviness in our shoulders after a long day. No, this is quieter, invisible, but it presses down just the same. It lives somewhere between the sigh you let out when no one is watching and the thoughts you keep tucked beneath your smile. This is the weight of everything that has happened. The lives we've lived, the people we've lost, the things we've built and then watched slowly fall apart. It's the weight of time, of memory, of expectations unmet, dreams that changed shape, and questions we still carry late at night. Questions like, did I live the right life? Have I become who I was meant to be? And maybe the heaviest one of all, what happens next? You see, in our youth, life feels like a wind at our back. Possibility pushes us forward, and even when we fall, there's time. Time to begin again, to reroute, to repair. But as the years stretch on, that wind shifts. It no longer pushes, it pulls. And it pulls us inward, toward reflection, toward reckoning, toward a truth that so many of us feel but rarely say out loud. Aging doesn't just change our bodies, it rearranges our hearts. In Buddhism, this is not a burden. It is an invitation to lay down what no longer serves us, to loosen the grip, to see what happens when we stop trying to carry everything. The Buddha once said, just as a snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past over and over again. But in this culture, especially here in the West, we are taught to cling to youth, to relevance, to roles and titles. We're taught that aging is a decline, something to be feared, fought, or worse, ignored. And so we carry the weight quietly. We put on the brave face. We smile at birthday candles we no longer want to count. But deep inside, many of us whisper, I don't want to feel this heavy anymore. So what if aging wasn't something to endure? What if it was something sacred? What if it held within it a hidden teaching? A doorway not into decline, but into freedom. In this episode, we'll begin to explore that path. Not with a map or prescription, but with a soft lantern of insight. Buddhist wisdom doesn't give us escape. It gives us presence. It invites us to meet aging not with fear, but with curiosity. Not with shame, but with reverence. And it begins with a question I'd like you to carry with you, not as a burden, but as a gentle feather in your palm. What am I still carrying that no longer belongs to me? Let that question breathe with you as we continue. This is not just a meditation on aging, it's a meditation on release, on reclaiming your lightness. Not the lightness of youth, but something even deeper, the lightness of peace. Part 2. The invisible backpack. Close your eyes for a moment, just a breath or two. Now imagine this, you're walking down a quiet path. The sun is low, the air is soft, but there's a heaviness pressing into your back. Not from the air or the earth, but from something you're carrying. A backpack. You didn't even realize it was there until you slowed down. This is what aging feels like for so many of us. Not just because of what we've been through, but because of what we've never put down. We carry regrets like smooth stones at the bottom of that pack. We carry old arguments, words we wish we had said, and some we wish we hadn't. We carry childhood wounds that were never truly acknowledged, moments of loneliness, the weight of comparison, the fear of becoming invisible. And perhaps most of all, we carry a deep cultural script. One that says, you must stay useful. You must stay young. You must not need too much. Is it any wonder we feel tired? But the Buddha taught something radically different. He said, you only lose what you cling to. And that includes the stories we've clung to for decades, about who we should be, how we should look, what we must achieve before it's too late. It includes the silent grief of things that didn't turn out the way we thought they would, the missed calls that never came, the job we gave our life to but that forgot us when we slowed down, the child who grew distant, the friends who drifted, the body that no longer moves like it used to. These are real losses, real weight. But Buddhism doesn't ask us to deny the heaviness. It simply invites us to see it, to meet it with awareness, to take one stone out of the backpack at a time and hold it up to the light. Ask it, are you still serving me? Or have you just become familiar? This is the quiet revolution of spiritual aging. Not to chase youth, but to uncover truth. There's a story in Zen about a monk who carried a large jug on his shoulder everywhere he went. People began to ask him, what's in it? He smiled and said, memories, titles, failures, and fears. One day he tripped and the jug broke. Everyone expected him to cry out, to scramble to gather the pieces. But he just laughed. For the first time, he said, I can feel the breeze on my shoulder. This is what Buddhist healing offers us. Not more to carry, but permission to release. Because you are not your jug. You are the one who notices, the one who breathes, the one who, even now, is allowed to begin again. So let me ask you something, gently. What have you grown so used to carrying you forgot it was optional? You don't have to empty your whole life in a day. But maybe, just maybe, you can set down one small stone tonight. A self-judgment, a fear, a memory that only hurts now. The path to lightness doesn't begin with doing more. It begins with carrying less. Part 3. The soft rebellion of slowing down. There is a quiet kind of rebellion that rarely gets talked about. It doesn't involve raised voices or marching feet. It doesn't happen on a stage or in front of a crowd. It doesn't make headlines or stir controversy. But it changes everything. It's the rebellion of saying, I'm not going to rush anymore. And if you've ever felt like life was speeding past you, like your days have become tasks to complete instead of moments to live, then this part is for you. You see, we grow up in a culture that worships productivity. Faster is better. Hustle is honorable. Busyness is a badge of importance. We're taught to measure our value by what we can still do, how much we can give, how useful we remain. And then aging happens. Slowing becomes inevitable, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, socially. And at first, that slowness feels like loss, like falling behind, like being left out of a party you were once invited to every day. But Buddhist wisdom offers something radical. Slowing down is not the end. It's the beginning of seeing. There's a Zen teaching that says, when you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. But above all, don't wobble. Wobbling happens when the body is in one place and the mind is in another. When you're sipping tea, but your mind is already worrying about tomorrow's appointment or replaying something you said a week ago. But the slowness of aging, the stillness it brings, is not a punishment. It's a gateway to presence, to awareness, to the parts of life we missed when we were moving too fast. You start to notice things. The way sunlight moves across the kitchen counter in the afternoon. The way your breath softens when you're not rushing to be somewhere else. The subtle emotions that arise when you hear a song you haven't heard since the 80s. The beauty of a quiet moment with someone you love, even if no words are spoken at all. This is the soft rebellion. It says, I will not measure my worth by how fast I move. It says, there is no shame in rest. There is wisdom in pause. Because in Buddhism, stillness is not passive. It is where clarity arises. It is where we finally meet ourselves without distraction, without disguise. There's a story of a disciple who asked the Buddha, "Master, what should I do to become enlightened?" The Buddha simply replied, "Sit." The disciple frowned. "And after that? Sit more deeply." So often we think healing and wisdom come from doing something grand, changing everything, fixing ourselves, achieving peace like it's some prize on a shelf. But maybe healing begins when we stop trying to fix. Maybe it begins when we simply sit with the truth of who we are, exactly as we are. Maybe the real freedom of aging is not in staying active every moment, but in finally having permission to slow down and be still enough to hear the whisper we've missed for years. You're already whole. So if today feels slower than it used to, if you feel like your pace has shifted from sprinting to walking, or walking to simply breathing, don't see that as a loss. See it as a homecoming, because the present moment has been waiting for you, and it doesn't care how fast you arrive, only that you do. Part 4. The Art of Receiving. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that being strong means never needing help. That to age gracefully is to stay independent, to carry our own bags, to say, "I'm fine even when we're not," to take care of everyone else but rarely ask for anything in return. And maybe that made sense when we were younger, when people needed us, when our roles, parent, provider, partner, leader, were tied to what we could give, what we could do. But aging asks a different question. Not what can I offer now, but rather, can I let myself receive? This isn't easy, especially in a world that treats needing help as weakness, especially in a culture that whispers, "Don't be a burden," especially when you've spent decades being the strong one. But in Buddhist teaching, there's no shame in receiving. In fact, it is a sacred practice. To receive with grace is not to be helpless. It's to be present with what is. It's to allow life to meet you where you are, not where you think you should be. The Buddha himself accepted food from others every day of his life. The greatest spiritual teacher the world has ever known walked barefoot through villages, with an empty bowl in his hands, allowing others to fill it. Not because he couldn't feed himself, but because receiving was part of his path. He taught that dana, the practice of giving, only exists when there is also someone willing to receive. And sometimes, that someone is you. There's deep dignity in letting love in saying yes when someone offers to carry your groceries, in allowing a friend to sit with you just because, in leaning into a hug that lasts a second longer than usual, in letting your children help you, even if you once helped them tie their shoes. Receiving is not a taking. It's a soft opening. It's a whisper to life. I trust you enough to be held. And yet, so many of us resist it. We say things like, "You don't have to. I'll manage. I don't want to bother anyone." But beneath those words, sometimes lives a quiet ache, a desire to be cared for, just as we've cared for others. The ache isn't wrong. It's not selfish. It's human. And aging, despite what the world says, is not a time to disappear. It's a time to be nourished, to be witnessed, to receive the very compassion we spent a lifetime giving away. There's a Zen parable about a man who held out his hands to receive water from a monk. But the monk noticed his fists were tightly closed. "I cannot pour water into a closed hand," the monk said gently. So too, life cannot give to us peace, love, healing, if we remain clenched, if we keep pretending we don't need anything, if we close ourselves off to the soft medicine of connection. So maybe lightness in later life isn't just about letting go. Maybe it's also about letting in care, letting in support, letting in moments of gentleness, letting in the truth that you are worthy of being held. Not because you've earned it, not because you've done enough, but simply because you are. So tonight, if someone offers to help you with something, no matter how small, try this. Don't say no. Instead, take a breath, pause, and say, "Thank you." Feel what happens inside your chest when you do. That softening, that warmth, that's not weakness, that's healing. Part 5. The Soul of Simplicity. Have you noticed that as we age, we begin to crave something quieter? Not just silence in the room, but silence in the soul. It's a kind of longing that doesn't show up on calendars or to-do lists. It arrives in the spaces between things, in that moment when you pause before responding, in the stillness that follows a long sigh, in the early morning light when the world hasn't started talking yet. This is the turning of the heart toward simplicity, not because we've given up, but because we've begun to see clearly. There's a Zen saying that goes, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The external tasks don't change. The world continues as it always has, but something inside softens. We no longer need everything to be grand, or fast, or loud. We stop chasing. We begin noticing the feel of warm tea in a porcelain cup, the way sunlight paints gold across the living room wall, the way the wind sounds different when you're really listening. This simplicity isn't a retreat. It's a return, a homecoming to what matters most. And yet, the modern world makes this hard. Tells us we should want more, that if life isn't filled to the brim with excitement, we're missing out, that slowing down means you're falling behind. But in Buddhism, the opposite is true. The more we empty ourselves of what is unnecessary, the fuller we become. The Buddha taught that suffering often comes from craving, from the never-ending hunger for more things, more validation, more achievement. But aging invites us into a subtler kind of joy, a joy not based on getting but on being. It's not that we stop caring, it's that we start caring differently, less about impressing, more about connecting, less about doing, more about being, less about reaching, more about resting. I once heard an elder say, in my youth, I wanted to change the world. In my middle years, I wanted to change myself. Now, I just want to sit with someone I love and listen to the birds. That, to me, is spiritual maturity. Not a withdrawal from life, but a deeper embrace of its essence. There's a kind of beauty you don't recognize until you're no longer trying to prove anything. A beauty in ordinary moments. A walk without a destination. A conversation with no advice, just presence. A meal eaten slowly without checking your phone. A nap in the sun, with nothing urgent pulling you away. That's the soul of simplicity. And it's not boring. It's not empty. It's not small. It's sacred. Because when we simplify, we make space. Space for peace. Space for grace. Space for joy to rise. Not from what we've added, but from what we've released. So today, just try one thing. Let something be simple. Don't overthink your morning. Don't rush to fill the silence. Don't chase an answer to every question. Just be here, because this moment right now is enough. And maybe so are you. Part 6. Rewriting the story of worth. For most of our lives, we're taught to measure worth by what we do. Not who we are, but what we accomplish, what we contribute, how many plates we can keep spinning at once. And for a while, that story carries us. We become the caregiver, the achiever, the helper, the one everyone else depends on. But then, something shifts. Maybe it's illness, retirement, a move, a quiet morning when your hands feel empty for the first time in decades. And you begin to wonder, if I'm no longer doing as much, do I still matter as much? This is the silent question so many people carry into their later years. A kind of spiritual ache, not for more time, but for more meaning. For a deeper kind of reassurance that your life is still valuable, even if the world doesn't see you the way it used to. And that's where Buddhist wisdom meets us with such quiet kindness. Tells us, you are not your productivity. You are not your usefulness. You are not your roles. You are not your resume. You are awareness. You are presence. You are breath. You are the one who notices the cherry blossoms bloom outside your window. Not because you have somewhere to be, but simply because you're alive enough to witness it. There's a powerful teaching in Buddhism called non-self, anatta. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It means the labels you cling to are not your true self. Mother, father, boss, caregiver, the strong one, the funny one, even the broken one. These are garments, beautiful for a time, but not who you are. And when life asks you to lay one of them down, you are not less whole. You are just closer to your essence. Closer to the part of you that cannot be retired, cannot be forgotten, cannot be measured in output or accolades. Closer to the part of you that simply is. So maybe worth isn't something we earn. Maybe it's something we uncover as we strip away everything that was never really us to begin with. There's a Zen story about a cracked teacup. One day, a student asked the master, "Why do you keep using this cup? It's broken." The master smiled, held it up to the light and said, "Because now it teaches me. In aging, your cracks are not flaws, they are light entries. Every wrinkle, every scar, every quiet morning alone is a doorway into something deeper than youth ever offered. Wisdom, presence, the kind of love that doesn't need to impress, only to be." So if you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered who you are without your title, your job, your busy schedule, please know this: you are still you, the you that feels, the you that notices, the you that longs, the you that loves, and that is enough. You don't have to earn your seat at life's table anymore. You are the table. So as you breathe in and out today, consider this gentle invitation. What if your worth was never in question? What would open up inside you if that question no longer needed answering? You might find that lightness isn't something you chase. It's something you remember. Part 7. Lightness is a way of being. Somewhere along the path of life, we are taught that lightness is a phase we grow out of. That it belongs to childhood, the laughter, the spontaneity, the freedom of not knowing what comes next. But maybe lightness isn't something we lose with age. Maybe it's something we grow back into once we've let go of everything we no longer need to carry. Not the lightness of denial, but the lightness of knowing, of understanding that we can't control the winds of time, but we can learn to sail differently, with softer hands, with a quieter heart, with less attachment and more love. There's a story in Buddhist tradition about an old woman who walked barefoot for miles each day to bring water to her village. Her back was bent, her body small, but her eyes were weightless. A traveler once asked her, "How do you carry such heavy water every day with such ease?" She smiled and replied, "Because I stopped carrying myself." This is the essence of Buddhist lightness. Not pretending life isn't hard, but no longer adding unnecessary suffering to the pain that's already there. Not resisting impermanence, but dancing with it, trusting it, letting it change you, because it will, whether you welcome it or not. But when you do welcome it, something beautiful happens. You begin to notice the breeze again. You begin to feel joy in small things, the way light flickers through leaves, the sound of distant laughter, the scent of coffee in the morning. You no longer need everything to go your way in order to be at peace, because peace is no longer out there. It's become your way of being. And you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What can I set down today?" Can I set down the regret, the comparison, the voice that tells me I'm running out of time, the bitterness I've been cradling like an heirloom? Can I forgive something? Can I love myself even here? Because here, right here in this moment is where lightness begins. Not with a plan, not with a fix, not with a new version of yourself, but with a breath that says, "I am enough, I am here, I am still becoming." Let the world move as it will. Let the past be what it was. Let the future arrive in its own time. And let this moment be the only thing you carry right now, because this moment is light enough. And so are you. If something in these words touched a soft place inside you, you're not alone. Many of us are walking this same path, toward gentleness, toward letting go, toward remembering that we are more than what we do. If you'd like to walk this path with us, you're always welcome here. Subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings and join our community of kind, curious souls exploring Buddhist wisdom, healing, and lightness, one breath at a time. And if you're ready, share in the comments. What's one thing you're ready to lay down? Let this be a place of release, a place where the weight gets just a little bit lighter. Together,